I'm R.A. Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. The dream is alive and well in Atlanta. Matt Cohen joins me today to discuss all things Atlanta as they continue their rise over the recent WNBA seasons. Welcome back to the show. It's dream time. I got Matt Cohen in the booth with me. Excited to chat everything. Matt, Atlanta Dream are a very interesting team. They made some nice additions during the offseason, have been kind of in a growth for a few years now. It's been this is about to be the third year, I believe. New coach, new GM, new systems. So this is kind of where it comes to fruition, and their vision has to kind of be the guiding light. No more excuses of the last leadership. Real quickly for me, if you could summarize or briefly recap what the 2023 season was for the Atlanta Dream.
Yeah, the Atlanta Dream finished 19-21, so sort of a back and forth year for them, finishing right around 500. They were the 5 seed going into the playoffs, and then they were swept in the first round 2-0 by the Dallas Wings. So into the playoffs, and now looking to build on that come now the 2024 season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for me because this team obviously is built around superstar Ryan Howard. Last year you had Alicia Gray. This offseason, and we'll get into the exact additions. But I think the message for me this coming season is going to be kind of a prove it season. But I want to remind everyone, make sure you check out the show notes, check out our sponsor and affiliate links. We just started working with some online sports books, so definitely check that out. If you have a gambling problem, please get help. Use the phone number in the show notes. And if you're getting any WNBA merch, I am willing to bet odds are that we have an affiliate agreement with that organization, which means they get money from it, and we also get a kickback, helping the WNBA ecosystem. It's all good. It's all happy. Okay, so in free agency, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if I missed anyone, they lost, they gained. Who they lost? Ari McDonald, D-Rob, Mo Billings, and A.D. Durr. Who they got? Jordan Canada, Ariel Powers, Tina Charles, and Crystal Dangerfield. Now, obviously, Laura Kubek is like training camp, so could be agreed. She could sign. But those are like the crux, the important players. You could also say like with a full suspension, they lost repair, but like, I don't really necessarily want to include that. They have the cap space to sign another player if they want to. So for me, this team is a very interesting one because they actually have the ability to run 12 and they have the ability to sign a fairly good player with $80K left in cap space at this point. So that's more than a minimum player. What would you say the state of this Atlanta Dream team is today, sitting a few days before the season begins?
So I liked what Atlanta did, generally speaking. I think, you look at where they were last year and their numbers, and offensively, for lack of a better term, it was kind of a train wreck. I mean, they were 10th in field goal percentage, in assists, effective field goal percentage, and true shooting percentage. So they're not scoring. They're not moving the ball. Offensively, it was not good. Now, defensively, which is sort of head coach Tanisha Wright's calling card, is, they were right in the middle of the pack. They were right, with the other playoff teams. And so defensively, not much really needs to change, but offensively, things really did. And then they go in the offseason and they go and trade for Jordan Canada. They sign Ariel Powers. They sign Tina Charles, and they get Crystal Dangerfield, as you said. A lot of offensive power in that group to be able to come in and help maybe take some pressure off of Ryan Howard, off of Alicia Gray, Cheyenne Parker, if you want to throw her in that mix, to try and bring some offensive flair into it. Now, that's the hope. Whether or not Tanisha Wright is going to make those adjustments or have some of her other coaches help her develop some more of that offensive game will be really telling of where they are. But otherwise, in general, I mean, the Tina Charles one is a really polarizing pick, but I did like, in general, the moves that they made to try and address the offensive side.
Here's my thing. If I look at this team, I go, okay, you have like a legit core of players, right? Ryan Howard is a superstar. She is going to be a top 10 elite player in this league at some point in her career. That's just the feel I'm getting right now. You add in an all-star in Alicia Gray, an all-star in Jordan Canada. So, and you have Cheyenne. So we're talking about a team that has tools. Now, there's always this give and take of how good your roster is when you look at it, and then you have to compare it to the other teams in this league. Do I think looking at some of the other teams in this league, they're contending with the Aces? No, not yet. But I definitely understand, and this maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, but I definitely understand if I'm in the Atlanta Dream camp, if I'm a GM and it says whatever, if I'm part of their front office and I'm looking at them and I'm going, okay, Alicia Gray is the top 5 player in her position, arguably, in this league. You can make that argument. Ryan Howard, all like we're talking Jordan Canada. Also, you can make that argument. Ryan Howard, I think maybe it's a little bit harder to make that argument only because it's so stacked, but because of the stardom potential. What I'm trying to say is if I'm in the Atlanta Dreams front office, if they're paying me money, I don't think I would have to sniff a lot of glue to sit there and go, this team is a few players away from not being a number 1 contender, not being a 2 seed, but competing with those top 5 teams. And if the team buys in, if the team is playing elite defense, which is their coach's calling card, then, hey, we can make a deep playoff run. Are we expecting to be a championship team this year? No. But we're no longer accepting that role of a team that's going to be in the lottery. We want to be taking active steps forward. So I get the Tina Charles move. I get some of these moves. I don't think they're going to give the end result that they're hoping. I don't think Tina Charles pushes this team over the top, especially because, if I'm being blunt, we haven't seen serious team success out of a Tina Charles team outside of the New York Liberty continue to fail in the semifinals or in early playoff rounds during the Lynx dynasty. So, like, I don't know. For me, I like the moves. I get where they're coming from, but I don't know if it's enough. And I don't know necessarily if they could have done something that would have been enough. They're going to be better than a lot of teams, but they're not necessarily going to be competing for a championship. What do you think? I guess, like, who do you think is going to be the biggest positive addition that they got this offseason?
I mean, I think that it begins and ends with Jordan Canada. I think, beginning of last season, I wrote an article around Dallas and Indiana and Atlanta around the assist issues and how in order to really take that next step, they were going to need to address those issues. Well, Dallas did to an extent, Indiana kind of, but not really, and Atlanta didn't really do anything. And so bringing in a player like Jordan Canada who's able to facilitate, who's able to run the offense, who's able to then also drive and kick and do all these different things that an offensive player can do, like Jordan Canada can, I think that's where it's going to be the biggest difference, is a player like Jordan Canada who's going to be able to set the table for them offensively. You're not relying on a Ryan Howard to have to do that. The ball should not be in her hands and then have to orchestrate the offense. She should be able to move off ball to be able to have somebody else facilitating for her. Alicia Gray, I think at times can kind of fill that Brittany Sykes role where she is working the ball around and stuff like that, but I think she also works better off the ball. A player like Jordan Canada works best on the ball and can then facilitate to players like Ryan and Alicia. And so I think, look, the Tina Charles, I agree. I haven't seen a lot of team first ball from her really in her career. If she still has that offensive game that she's had, in years past, it'd be great. Aerial Powers also has that kind of polarizing personality. Will she be able to keep shooting knowing the ball is not going to be directly orchestrated to get to her? Or maybe in the second unit it might be. And so I think Jordan Canada is really the primary piece here. If this team is going to take that next step like you talked about, right? It's no longer good enough to call this team an on-the-rise team. Why? Because the on-the-rise teams are the ones that were bad and are starting to get good. Atlanta proved last year that they're good. But they need to take it to that next tier of like that third seed, fourth seed area. And you just like the offense has to progress. You have to be able to move the offense along the way that you do defensively. And Jordan Canada is going to be the key.
I agree. I mean, I also I think the move of Jordan Canada is great. The addition of Crystal Dangerfield is almost a steal for this team because everything you've been talking about. First of all, Jordan Cannon is a great defender, undersized slightly, but a great defender. Crystal Dangerfield, great offensive player, especially in the third and fourth quarter. Struggles defensively at times. I get that. Cool. We can talk about that whole thing. But like the additions they're making, Crystal Dangerfield is the type of player when the rest of the team is going in a scoring drought, she finds a way to get some buckets and she heats up. Now that can be a positive or a negative, because that means she's not necessarily facilitating the other players, whatever. But she spends the first half of games really focusing on getting the balls to others. And Aerial Powers also addresses that offensive thing. Here's my thing. I'm a huge, huge fan of Aerial Powers' game when put into the proper role on a team. That's what DC was able to do. They saw, hey, you're an electric shooter. You have a vibe that our team needs. You have an electricity that our team needs. You can support us on defense in a second unit. You can be a great seventh player on our team. But you need to know that this is your role and you need to fulfill that role. It's not you get the ball, start looking for how you're going to get your shot off. Start looking at what's best for the offense. Move the ball out of your hands. Don't start playing ISO ball just because you had a couple good seasons where you averaged over 10 points or whatever it is, or you won a championship. You need to buy into the system. And I think Aerial Powers, like, maybe I'm harping on this too much, but I think it was a year ago, 2 years ago, the Atlanta Dream had this whole thing where they put whatever your role was on the team in your locker on a printed piece of paper. So it was very clear and defined. I think it was
last year.
Maybe they did it again. I feel like it was in her first, Tanisha Wright's first year as coach. But whatever. The point is more so, I think that is a perfect example of something that might benefit a player like Aerial Powers to clearly define and daily remind and have that open communication about that, because I think she can be a huge addition. Now, I think the price tag and the guarantee is a little bit out there, but I think she can be a huge addition to this team in a role that they desperately need if she buys into that role. I don't think she should be a starter, and I don't think that she should be the main focal point when she's on the court. But if she can be a complementary piece, similar to a Crystal Dangerfield, and similar, that's the same question for Tina Charles, if we're being honest. That's the big question, is the three best players on this team are not the players that I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about Ryan Howard, Alicia Gray, Jordan Canada. I'm worried about Tina Charles and Aerial Powers and how they are going to be able to buy into a system and accept roles that maybe aren't what they expected for themselves or have played in recently. What do you think?
I agree. And I think, look, whether or not Tanisha Wright had a hand in picking these players and telling the front office, hey, I want these players to come in and help with our offense, regardless of that, they're here. And it's up to Tanisha right now to figure out how to get these players to buy into her system. Because I'm going to be honest with you, this is a year where Atlanta and its fan base should have higher expectations. And if Tanisha is not able to get a Tina Charles to buy into the system, and if she's not able to get someone like Aerial Powers to buy in and accept her role, like you said, or a Crystal Dangerfield, who is usually a wonderful team player, but it maybe has fits and spurts and looks really inconsistent and looks sort of out of sorts, this might be it for Tanisha Wright. She might be the first head coach fired during the season, if Atlanta stumbles and by, let's say, mid-July or so, and they're starting to fall back or, bottom of the playoff, seeding where it's not looking great for them, it might be it for her. This is a put up or shut up year for Tanisha Wright. She has to be able to figure out how to take these pieces, have them figure out how to gel together, both to keep up the defensive intensity that they demonstrated they can do last year, but also to improve the offense, because that's how they're going to move to the next level. And so I agree with you. I think it's going to come down to, can these types of players accept team first roles and support the big names on the squad?
I'm going to completely agree about the Tanisha Wright in the hot seat. I think she has the most excuse when we look at some of these teams. She's going to have more excuse than Phoenix. She's going to have more excuse than Seattle, or I'm trying to think of another team that recently, Chicago. She's going to have more excuse than a lot of these teams. Well, sorry, Chicago's going to have all the excuse in the world. But I think that I agree with you. I think we're going to get into the season and it's going to be like, okay, this roster has talent. I'll put it this way. I think it's going to be less of a where are they seeding wise, but how the team's playing, how they're buying in, kind of your second point. Because seeding wise, I can see it play out just when you look at who's on certain rosters in this team. If Connecticut doesn't have a drop off year, I'm sorry, Atlanta Dream, it's going to be hard for you to crack top 5, right? Like just flat out Seattle, Phoenix, Vegas, Connecticut, New York. Those are, and I'm not even talking about Dallas yet. So like we have 6 really, really good teams. I think it's going to be hard for them to crack, but are they competing with these teams? Can they pull out a win again in a tight moment against some of these teams? Not necessarily are they defining themselves, because I think, yes, they no longer should be a rise team. They should be a playoff team, that it's a surprise if they don't make the playoffs. But I do think, just given where the chips have fallen in this league, I think if like, as much as I can convince myself, if I'm paid by Atlanta to say this team should be competing against those teams, I also have an out, which is Tina Charles, right? Like that's kind of their out. That was their big play at the big. They know the bigs was their next weakness. I think the Atlanta Dream have done a really good job since this new leadership came in, setting the bar low, setting expectations low, and always trying to overachieve them, even if it's by a hair. Some would argue they didn't. Some would argue they did. But I think now, as you said, it's a put up or shut up season. You can't continue that, like, we're going to be a bottom dwelling team for 5. Like, you can't keep saying, like, in a couple of years, we're going to start being a competitor in a couple of years. Like DC is an example. Right now, Coach Big T keep wanting to call him Coach T. Big T is saying, like, we're punting for the next 2 years. Cool. But if in 2 years from now you say that again, and then in 2 years from then you say it again, you kind of lose everything. I'm curious for you on their bench, assuming Parker, Canada, Gray, Charles, and Howard are their starters. That was 5, yes. Who do you think between Powers, Dangerfield, Jones, Hillman, Nia, who else do we think is going to be? Who do you think is going to be, in your mind, with the style of play you like, who's going to be the most important bench piece for this team?
I think it comes down to Naz Hillman again. I mean, Naz last year demonstrated an ability to really carry the second unit and sometimes even the first unit at times when things got a little stale. I think she was a great contributor for this team and really grew in her role. I would really hate to see her kind of lose some of her rotational minutes. I think she has the most promise right now coming off the bench. I think she has the most room to continue to grow in her game. And so I would hate to see her lose valuable rotational minutes for her, unless Tina Charles is on a heater and she's just going off for like 25 a game and it's, vintage TC and you're like, okay, great. Let her, just let her cook, let her do her thing. I think I get that you want to have Tina try and sort of work herself into the system a bit, but you can't do it at the expense of a Naz Hillman. I think it's to no one's surprise that I'm not the biggest fan of Haley Jones. I want her to be able to do well, but I think just given the other pieces on this team, especially with Crystal and whatnot, I would say it's Naz Hillman's importance for her to be able to come off the bench and produce and to be able to be given those opportunities by Tanisha to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a similar boat with you and Haley. I think she has a lot of skills that could make her a very, very useful Swiss Army knife for this league. Her shooting is not there. That's what it comes down to for me. And her free throw shooting is still not there. So in my opinion, Atlanta is a team that has space and time to let some players develop. And she is a player. I said it before. There weren't many places that I thought she should drop to. I think Atlanta's the right place for her because she can grow there. She has some time to grow. We'll see what happens there. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking Nia Coffey. I'm mostly because of the Swiss Army knife aspect, mostly because she's a player who's been around, and I feel like has been around Tanisha because she was also spent time in Vegas, knows kind of what she's looking for. And look, I'm not a coach. I'm not an elite basketball player, but I feel like coaches like players they can trust, players that they have experience with. It's not a coincidence when you see a player stick around a singular coach when there's a lot of movement on that roster. And so looking here, I go, okay, I think there's a big role, especially with that 150 guaranteed price tag. I think there's a big expectation of you're going to be able to do the intangibles. You're going to be able to do the things and kind of lead in a direction that we need. And I'm excited for what that means for this team, mainly because she's a Minnesota product. But, I'm not biased towards Minnesota at all.
Never.
Never. No, I mean, look, the great state. Who do you think, I guess, is going to be the biggest loss that this team is going to experience? Or do you think they even feel the experience? Because I'm not worried about AD. I'm not worried about Mo Billings being gone, if I'm being blunt, or D-Rob. Aari McDonald is a player that maybe hasn't been the greatest in her short stint so far in this league, but a player who excites me and is fun to watch at times and has those moments with splashes of just wild excitement and microwaveness and whatever other words you can come up with. What are your thoughts on this team, I guess, missing out on Aari? Or is there a different player you think is going to be the more missed player?
No, I think for me, it would have been Aari McDonald. I think there was a lot of talk about the relationship that she had built. I think she was a fan favorite in Atlanta. I think a lot of players there liked her and were liking that they can grow with her. But when you get your opportunity to take a player like Jordan Canada, I think that's an immediate upgrade. You're right. Aari McDonald had her moments. I think she was able to demonstrate that she is sort of coming into her own and blossoming. But for where this team is at, in addition to where the league is at, I think you've been talking about that a lot already about how some of these other teams have also really improved. Atlanta needed to go out and make that move. And so I think when you bring in veterans like Canada, like a Tina Charles, like Aerial Powers, like a Crystal Dangerfield, hopefully who are willing to buy into the system like we talked about, I don't think this team is going to miss her in terms of what's happening on the court. I think locker room wise, it'll still be able to flow. There's a lot of veterans in there. There's some youthful exuberance in there. Everyone's able to, I think, to be able to gel. That's going to be really important. So long as players like Powers and TC can buy into that team mentality. And so I don't think they're going to miss Aari McDonald. I think it's going to be my expectation is that this team should be able to work with those veteran-laden players to be able to take those next steps. But things can fall apart real quick with personalities like TC and Powers.
The thing that honestly, the biggest question that I have, because even if the Tina Charles, Aerial Powers, even if this roster is working out, the question I had going into the offseason, all last season, was they lacked help in the post. They lacked front court depth. I see them add one player to address that, and it's Tina Charles, who, with respect to the legend who she is not known as such of a true big or a true center. Yeah, she has elements of it. She has elements that's not. That's why she was a problem for a lot of true centers throughout her career. That said, I'm curious your thoughts on what this team is going to do when they're facing, look, it's all fine and dandy when you're going up against a New York or like a Minnesota, but what do you do against a Dallas? What do you do against, Connecticut or some of these other teams? Now, heck, even Chicago. What do you do when you're going up against true size for this team?
So I think what makes TC a really intriguing player for this squad is that she can pull out those big centers, those more traditional centers. So she can shoot from distance. She can shoot jumpers and whatnot from further out. So if you're able, for example, from Dallas, if Atlanta is able to pull a Tierra McCowan out of the paint, and even if the goal isn't to get the shot for Tina Charles, just getting that size out of the paint gives more room for Jordan Canada. It gives more room for Alicia Gray and Ryan Howard to be able to attack. And then if those bigs are going to collapse or trap the box or whatever they may do, that gives open opportunities for a player like Tina to be able to then shoot from distance. And so Atlanta's going to need to be able to read that situation. And if those things are successful, that also might give Tina more opportunities to move and work within the paint as well. Maybe not from just a post touch or a post feed, but maybe in motion and through the sequence of the set that they're running. And so Tina's going to have to play probably a little bit further out against more of the traditional bigs offensively to keep them out. Defensively, it might just need to be more help rotation on players like that and just keep her out of foul trouble. Naz has demonstrated an ability at times to be able to handle some of that, so it might be either pairing them together. Cheyenne's also really good defensively, and so how they are able to utilize the help rotation defensively will be an important piece. But at least offensively, Tina can space the floor a little bit and try and keep some of that size away.
Hopes and expectations for this team, realistically, I would almost say no, forget it. I don't get to talk on this one. You tell me, what do you think? Hopes and expectations for this team?
Wow, you cutting yourself off. I never
I
thought
know.
I'd see the
I
day.
gotta do it every once in a while. Yeah. Keep the people on their toes.
I mean, the hope is that they all gel and it comes together. The hope is everything we've been talking about is that these veterans who come in accept their roles. I hope that they're able to increase what they can do offensively, defense, and not have that sag defensively. They finished for the most part in terms of a lot of the defensive metrics, fifth, sixth, somewhere right there in the middle of the league. If you can continue that kind of defensive effort and those kind of numbers while improving a lot of your offense, my hope is that this team will then be able to finish in that 4 or 5 seed, even higher, at least maintaining where they were last year, if not pushing to that 4 seed. That's my hope. The expectation, though, is that I think it's going to take some time. I think there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road. I think it's going to be important to figure out who has that voice in the locker room and how they're building this thing together. And so the hope is that they'll be able to finish in the top 4. I think more realistically, pending injuries and also the development of a Haley Jones and a Naz Hillman, and if Ami here gets some time as well off the bench, I think I'm looking at more of that 5, 6, maybe even 7 seed, depending on if Dallas is able to float without Satu until July, if Minnesota is able to gel and mesh together nicely. So my expectation is that they'll be more on the lower seed, but my hope is that they'll be able to push for higher.
I almost feel like they might be one of those teams, and I believe they did this last year. They started off hot and then kind of cooled off.
Yeah.
I could see that happening again. As you know, then to every episode, who's your GOAT?
Gus.